Azimuth Ride the Winds. This is a game that has to do thematically with castaways and, well, winds and sea and rafts. But as you will see, it is a pretty abstract game. This is the board of the game. The game plays with 2, 3, or 4 players. The setup is quite different based depending on the number of players. Here I set up the game for 2 players. And each player has a castaway, a set of rafts, and a lighthouse that represents the location where you're trying to go. At the beginning of the game, the players will place the lighthouses on an edge of the board. Again, how you do that depends on the number of players. In 2 players, you have the island on one side of the board and the lighthouses on the other, and then you shuffle the rafts face down. You place them in this configuration here, and then you flip them face up. So they will always be in this configuration here, just you don't know which rafts are where. Each player also has a set of wind tokens, and sometimes, depending on the situation of your players, you will also have a wind token of the opponent to place on the board. The castaway starts on the island, and as you can see, there are these symbols on the board. The circles is where you will place wind tokens, and then you have these little crosses here, which is where you move the rafts. Now, the game has 2 phases. The first phase is early on in the game when players still have wind tokens. During that phase, when it is your turn, you can take one action, which can be to add a wind token to the board or to move your castaway. You add a wind token, resolve the action, or you move your castaway. Later, when you do not have wind tokens here, you have a larger range of things that you can do. It is still 1 action per turn, but it can be to move the castaway, or to move one of your winds, or to rotate one of your winds, or, get this, to rotate, not move, a wind of the opponent. Now, some details of what happens when you move those winds. Oh, well, when you place them and then when you move them. When you place a wind, you place it on one of these circles here, and it must be clear the direction that the wind is pointing. When you add a wind token to the board, right after doing that, you move all of the rafts of that color that are adjacent to it. The wind positions are adjacent to a number of raft positions, usually 4, but on the edges of the board it can be fewer. So when you add one, you move all of the rafts that are adjacent to it of that color by 1 spot in that direction. For example, this one goes here. This one goes here. When you're moving a raft from one area to another and there is another raft, it simply goes on top of it usually. And suppose the next, this player here places this token here. So we move this raft here. When we have a stack, we move the highest raft of that color in the stack and everything above it. So in this case, we move these ones here. And then suppose, for example, that the red player decides to do this. And then we resolve that. So you add a wind and you resolve, and you move all of the rafts that are affected by it. Or instead of adding a wind, you can choose to move your castaway. The castaways only move orthogonally, and they can move only to either the island, from the island to the island, or they can move 2 rafts that are adjacent to them, and in this case they can only move orthogonally. And that could be a good sequence for me. Now I'm moving like this, and then I'm moving this, and then I'm moving this. Now, when you are on a raft, you cannot, and there are other rafts that move. They don't go on top of the castaway because that will look weird. They go underneath that castaway. So that is the basic idea. There can also only be one castaway on a stack or on a raft. So there are a couple of things that you can do so that your castaway actually blocks, impedes, delays the actions of the opponent. Now, as I said, first phase of the game, move your castaway or add winds. When you add winds to the board in this phase, that's what they do. They just stay there. You can move them, nothing else that you can do with them. Also, only one wind per position, so there are also considerations there of like, well, I'm occupying a certain position, so my opponent cannot get there. Once you have added all the tokens that you started with to the board, second phase of the game, you can keep moving your castaway as usual. But as we said, you can also move your winds. When you move a wind, you keep the same orientation. You can move it orthogonally to a wind position adjacent to it, or you can also move them diagonally if there is no raft in between. After you move a wind, then you simply activate all of the rafts of that color that are adjacent to the wind after you moved it. You can also, instead of moving or doing anything else, rotate a wind. And you can rotate your own winds or the winds of the opponent. Once you rotate it, as usual, you activate all of the rafts that apply, that are adjacent to that, to the wind that you just activated, and you move them in the direction indicated after the activation. So, for example, now I'm gonna do this, suppose, and now I'm gonna move these rafts like this, and I'm gonna move this one here. From here now it's gonna be a little tougher to get to my lighthouse, so maybe I will have to move my tokens a little bit. Meanwhile, the opponent is doing other stuff, etc, etc, etc. But this is the idea. Add winds to the board. Add winds to the board. And then later rotate winds, move winds until you manage to bring your castaway to your lighthouse, and that's when and how you win the game. Which may seem a little dull. I showed you here. That seems like very basic, but when the opponent, of course, is also manipulating your winds, sending away from you need to be getting the rafts away from where you want them to be. And how do they do so? Well, by maybe there was a time where you put your rafts on top of theirs, and now they're just sending the rafts far from you just to annoy you. So there are a lot of ways of getting in the way of the opponent. That is really how the strategy of the game works. Try to create as many impediments for the opponent as you possibly can, defend against their possible attacks, and try to get your castaway to your lighthouse, be the first player to do so, and you're the winner of the game. This is an entertaining game. It's not mind-blowing maybe, but I had a good time playing it. It's a solid little game. I play with 2 players only, disclaimer here, and I'm happy with it. I had a good time playing it, and so that the person that I played it with, I don't know that I feel the need to play with more, because then I'm afraid that the board would become a little too chaotic when you have, say, 3 other players that are moving rafts around you. I'm afraid that by the time the game goes back to you, a completely different situation to analyze, and your previous strategies may not amount to much at that point. Also, I'm afraid that precisely because of that, the design at a higher count of players may engender analysis paralysis and downtime. No good things. Here, as the game is, things remain clear. I get a sense of those main things that you may try to do, may want to do. Then I am taking those into account while elaborating my strategy, and I have an interesting set of problems, an interesting amount of dilemmas to deal with without feeling overwhelmed by possibilities. I like that. It's in there. It is in that Goldilocks range there of enough problems to analyze, but not too many. So still on the light side overall. Of course, also However, because the game has no randomness whatsoever and it is so tight, then it can be a little unforgiving. Maybe not a single mistake is what will get you to defeat, but two too easily, two bad moves, and then the opponent is off on their way to the lighthouse, and you're stuck in a corner of the board with no rafts around, only rafts of the opponent, and then it may be hard to catch up. So even at two players, there is at least a temptation, I would say, of analysis paralysis, if nothing else, because if you lost a game just because of one or two bad moves, then the following game maybe you become a little bit overcautious and you're there analyzing and maybe even over analyzing. So there is that for a game that is so cute, with those little cute castaways, with those nice hats, and these like really nice looking components. Oh, the tokens, those are thick. That's the way tokens should be. So for something that looks so neat and simple and clean and has such dry mechanics, it can get a little cutthroat, because then really getting in the way of the other player's castaway, getting the other player castaway totally far from where they should be, reversing the direction that they're going to, pushing them away, etc., etc. It can be a little cutthroat. I'd not expect that the game could be so confrontational. But then, so is chess, which also is a very clear abstract design, and of course it can get very mean. So there is that. There definitely is some take that element here, which is not unwelcome. The design, because it is so abstract, has a little bit of a dry quality to it, and then you may have a little friendly banter that surrounds some particularly confrontational situations that may arise, and of course you built because you were trying to get the opponent stuck somewhere really bad for them. There is some interesting enough, although there is no random element, sometimes you may overlook something, and then there may be some very interesting reversal of quote-unquote fortune, reversal of situations. You thought that you were very close to victory, and all of a sudden, for some reason or whatever, you're back on the island again. You have no idea how that happened. So there is enough complexity there to throw a couple of curveballs, so simply maybe because you overlooked some possibilities you did not examine everything. So there are still surprises, although they do not come from random, as they functionally work in a very similar way. So I enjoyed it. If you don't mind a little bit of confrontation there, again, a little bit of backstabbing, which is fun to inflict and not so much to take, of course, but that comes with the design. You cannot have one without the other, and the design still being fair. Okay, you could have a very non-symmetrical gameplay, which you can backstab, but cannot be backstabbed. But in most cases, this is how it works. If there's a chance that I'm gonna get you stuck in a corner with no rafts around you and no way for you to easily get your wins there's a chance that you're gonna do that to me. So, a little bit of dry design, definitely an abstract design, with, however, a healthy element of confrontation, and take that. That makes for a strange mix, however, so maybe it will not be for all palates. But in general, I found Azimuth to be entertaining. This is a fun little game. I wouldn't play with my wife because she likes simple abstract games such as this one. She would not, I believe, enjoy the level of confrontation that comes with the game. But as for a light, simple filler, then I think this could be a good game, a good option for my game night. Azimuth Ride the Wind. Simple, linear, abstract, but with enough meat, to make for a flavorful game session.